I dare you to follow me into the heart of darkness. Hello and welcome to a slightly different video today that was prompted by a couple more recent reads that I had where I thought, wow, this author really made me go into the inner recesses and dark corners of my inner world. And how on earth did they manage to do that? So I want to look at 4 authors today, and they are Ursula K. Le Guin, China Miéville, Stephen Erickson, and Livia Elliott. And by doing so, I want to explore 4 different ways of how those authors make us, explore ethical dilemmas, explore the way we make choices, and by that then also make us explore what it actually means to be human. My first example is Ursula K. Le Guin. Le Guin often employs what I would like to call an explorer figure. What do I mean by that? This can actually be a real explorer who comes to a foreign world or planet and tries to figure out what's going on and is confronted with an indigenous population and their customs, their cultural norms. Those figures are mostly outsiders. It can also be somebody from that culture who in return explores a settler colony on their planet or something like that. But it's mostly about cultural encounters and how do we perceive the other and what do we do to actually make them the other. And Le Guin tries to undermine this with the explorer figure, because the explorer figure's belief systems are severely tested and in times just taken apart. And as this figure is a stand-in for us as the reader, we kind of like go on to this exploration ourselves. An example is Planet of Exile. In Planet of Exile, we have 2 groups on the same planet. One's are there as the indigenous population and the other one are coming from outside. But both groups refer to themselves as human and to the other as non-man. And that gets confusing after a while for the reader, but it also questions why and how do we decide who is human and who isn't. So if we want to decide who of those 2 groups are actually the aliens on this planet, we have to make some decision and have to have some categories that we ascribe to humans. And Le Guin is not doing this for us. We as the reader have to do this. This is kind of like how she makes me as a reader go inside and have a look and see, what do I actually think who's human and who isn't? And why do I think that? My next example is China Miéville. China Miéville does something similar as Le Guin, but also very different. Where Le Guin has an explorer figure, Miéville has an everyman or every woman. This is somebody who is part of the overall fabric of the world that Miéville depicts for us and is very, very average. I'm thinking of characters like Isaac in Perdido Street Station or Avis in Embassy Town. They're both kind of like very average, normal human figures. And they're especially human when it comes to making decisions. They procrastinate and might make the situation even worse. They're kind of like as, helpless when it comes to big ethical dilemmas as we as the reader might be. And what makes them even more human is they make mistakes and then have to face up to the fallout, the consequences of those mistakes. So that's just one element. But Miéville gives this element an extra twist. he has also a non-human figure that actually wants to be like the everyman or woman, a figure that's sent on a character arc that might make this alien, clearly non-human figure in the end then perhaps more human. And an example for this would be Yagorek, again from Perdido Street Station. And it has this really interesting effect that what is presented to us as quite average and quite human in all its messiness suddenly gets desirable. And we, as the reader, have to figure out, but why would somebody want this? Why would somebody want my procrastination? What's attractive about that? Nothing is attractive about that. Look at that poor character, that poor human character who is making a whole mess out of a situation. Wouldn't it be so much better if they would not have this character trait or would not be so indecisive, for example? And again, it's kind of like, this type of figure with which the author is able to push us into this realm where we have to kind of like look at the perhaps more darker aspects of what it means to be human. My third example is Stephen Erikson. And the first two authors all kind of like work with characters that are then stand-ins for the readers and make me as a reader identify with this character and do, part of that exploration that the character undergoes. Erikson, on the other hand, is almost famous for thwarting the reader's desire to actually root for a character. So how does he still manage to make me go into those dark corners of my inner world? And I think one strategy he uses is that he either, shifts the context of behavior or completely is withholding the context of behavior. So how does that actually work? And what does it even mean? So for a while I was actually lecturing psychology, and I used to try to explain this conundrum to students that behavior without context is meaningless by using an example. And the example I picked, because I'm in Ireland, was the hunger strikers in the northern part, in Northern Ireland. And their plight and what they would use as a strategy. And we would also then look at what's called the global assessment scale. The global assessment scale is something that's used in psychiatry to assess human behavior. And if, for example, you stop cleaning yourself, your personal hygiene stops, you might even start to smear your feces around, you're very low. You're just above 0 on this scale that goes from 0 to 100. So you're deemed as extremely low functioning. And if we look at the hunger strikers, this is exactly what some of them did. They used their feces and smeared them on the wall. And according to that set of context, psychiatry and its measurements, we would deem those people as extremely low functioning. If I shift this context, on the other hand, into the Northern Ireland situation and the history of Northern Ireland and the history of the conflict in Northern Ireland, I get a very different picture. Then this exact same behavior suddenly becomes a form of political protest. So the context that I apply to a behavior very much determines my interpretation of the behavior. An example for those shifting contexts is the scene with the K-Shay Shamal matron, where we have in Memories of Ice, the matron who, looks after Tok in a way. And she shows actually quite mothering behavior. So she regurgitates food to feed him and she licks him clean. And why we as humans would say, well, that's a bit gross, it's still quite common behavior for animals looking after their young. The problem just is that this is not the context in which this behavior is taking place, but the context that we have is a prison scene, and the young that the matron looks after is not a scissor-hand dinosaur, but it's a humanoid person. And that flips this behavior into something very different, and it becomes a torture scene. And yeah, some of those shifts of context that we find in Melazen can be quite shocking. And it makes us explore questions like, how far do we take context actually into account when we make, an interpretation of behavior? Or also, how far do we just take context for granted? Could the context, for example, be a different one than the one that we assume it is? And it also makes us question, like, on what grounds do we actually make those decisions about behavior? No? What do we take into account? What categories do we actually use? My last example is different because it's not a book in the traditional sense like the other three have been, but it's called Unearthed Story, and it's an interactive fiction app that was created by Olivia Elliott. She is the author of the stories that we encounter there. And it's different because in the previous examples, it's the author who does the dirty work for us, the reader. So if a beloved character has to be killed, or if there are wartime atrocities, if there is abuse of all types, then with a stroke of their pen or a press on the keyboard, the author sorts this for us and makes the decision how this will play out. This is different with Unearthed Stories because now we, the reader, are in this position of the author, and we have to make that decision. And some of those decisions are really, really tough and push us into, some really awful ethical dilemmas, like you need information. You have only two choices. You have a choice where, okay, I try to do without the information, even though I know that might not get me very far, and I might have no real idea, what I do without the information, and I obtain the information, but my only way to do so is to torture somebody, and I know that after I'm finished with them, they will die. So, what do you choose? And you might be surprised how easy it might feel to choose I want the story to continue. I want the information. Let's kill somebody. So Unearthed Stories and Olivia Elliott as the author push us really into, some almost weird psychological experiment where we have to decide who lives and who doesn't, who gets abused and who goes away without. So those are very, how shall I say, deep-reaching ethical questions. And if you want to read on, the story only continues if the reader makes a decision. So to get the story to continue, I have to somehow decide. No? And this really forces me in some respects, depending on what options I'm choosing, to question myself and think, whoa, did I just do that? Did I really just choose to kill somebody? How did that come about? Also, sometimes the author is quite devious and we only get crap choices. It's really been stuck between a rock and a hard place. And whatever you choose, neither one is really great. Or you might get a whole, range of choices. And when you look at them, they're all the same choice. So you actually don't get a choice. And that causes a lot of, let's say, different emotions while you are immersed in this story. You feel the frustration of the character who might have to choose but doesn't have a choice. Or you might actually feel the same surprise and perhaps even shock about yourself that you made a choice that if this was real life, you would never ever choose. So, as I say, this story, or those stories, it's a set of 6 stories, they really push the boat out when it comes to how can an author make me go into the dark corners of my inner world. So those were 4 different ways of doing this. There are, of course, a whole pile of other ones. If you have one that you would like to share, I would like to hear from you in the comment section. And yes, hopefully this was of some interest to you, and maybe it even makes you want to explore this a little bit more yourself. In any case, happy reading and all the best.